In this video, we're talking positively about the PlayStation 5 Slim, the next God of War, and how bad are these layoffs at the biggest Sony studio. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. I hope you had a great Halloween. I spent it doing everything I love. I played some video games, I ate candy, I carved jack-o'-lantern, I watched all the Halloween movies, and then for the first time ever at my new house, I got to sit in my driveway with a bonfire and give out candy to trick-or-treaters. It was awesome. We had over like 250 kids come by, and I ran out of candy. I had over 800 pieces of candy, and I ran out because I was given huge handfuls. It was awesome. So yeah, the first thing I want to talk about today is the PlayStation 5 Slim, because it's out in the wild, and of course because it's easier to start controversy and get clicks than actually say anything positive. A lot of people are kind of making a big deal out of seemingly nothing, I would say. So I want to start out here by talking about some positives, which I think there are a lot. The first one being the PS5 Slim. If you compare it to the PS5 regular, if you want to call it that, the original PS5, it's a lot smaller. The guy who posted a picture of it sitting next to his regular PS5, he has the D brand plates on that don't have the corners that come out, so it's very flush with the system. And even with those on the original PS5, the Slim is dramatically smaller and thinner. Now, I know I said I was going to be largely positive, but I gotta say, I saw a comment that was like, this looks like one of those GS5 knockoffs you get at, like, I don't know, Walmart, just like in a weird aisle. It's like, oh, it's an emulator machine that looks like a PS5. And I kind of agree. It does look a little bit cheaper, mainly because there's so much more glossy plastic on it, but I don't really think it's like the best looking console regardless. So when I get a PS5, the first thing I really want to do with it is just put it in the TV cabinet and not really think about it, right? Like, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is how it plays games and how well it plays games. And as far as we know, this thing's going to play games as well as the current PS5. So objectively, it's a good console. The biggest controversy surrounding it that's really come up, though, of course, has to do with the disk drive. And we got a screenshot where it says, like, you need to connect to the internet to use your disk drive, but the wording on it, I don't know. There's a few different things I noticed. It could be real, it could be fake, I don't know. This is why I think it might be fake. The first sentence that it puts on the screen is can't use your disk drive, which that's a weird way to shorten a sentence for Sony. It should say, like, you can't use your disk drive, or this disk drive cannot be used yet, this disk drive cannot be used without an update. And it spells disk drive D-I-S-C drive, which I think disk is spelled with a K. I think you can spell it either way depending on what you're talking about, but just it came out as weird to me. As someone who's like an English major, I do a lot of reading. I was like, that's weird to see it written like that and use D-I-S-C to spell disk. But beyond that, the controversy itself, I think, is like a little bit overblown. I understand like the preservation aspect of it, where people who like want to collect PS5 games, they're already upset because a lot of games these days, if you buy a disc, if the disc doesn't have the game on it, it has like a license check. So when you put the disc in, it says, oh, this person owns this game. And then you're able to download it from the cloud as an update for the game. But to me, that kind of makes it seem like the battle is already lost, right? Like, how many games these days come out and just have single player? Like, you just put the disc in, the entire game is on the disc, and then it just plays off your console. I think the list is very few and far between. And it's at the point where we have to celebrate when games do this. The newest example, ironically, is coming directly from Sony. It's Horizon Forbidden West Complete Edition, where you're going to get the original game with all the patches already on the disc, and you're also getting the Burning Shores DLC expansion included on the disc as well. And presumably this game isn't getting any more software updates, so that's good, right? Like, to have the whole game on the disc. I think it is a really cool practice, but it's not really surprising to me that things have gotten the way that they are, just because consoles can connect to the internet and games can be updated now. So back in the day, like in the PS1, the PS2, and early PS3 games, you know, if you released a game on a disc or a cartridge, that was the game, right? Like, the whole game had to be there. It had to be as bug free as possible. And if by some disaster you released it with a bug, that bug was there permanently. And that actually happened on the Wii. The Wii couldn't update games over the internet for some reason. So like with Twilight Princess, I want to say, if people had a weird game breaking bug happen, they had to send a memory card with their save to Nintendo, and Nintendo would fix it and send it back. And while, yeah, being able to update games over the internet now is an objectively awesome tool, there is a dark side to it, which is the same thing that's happening with like FSR2 and DLSS. It starts out as something that developers are like supposed to use as a tool in an emergency, and then it just becomes the norm. So before, you would still kind of make an effort to finish the game and put it on the disc, and then hopefully you don't have to update it, but if you do, that failsafe is there. And as things have sort of spiraled and things have gotten worse, now it's like what I said earlier, where the game isn't even on the disc is just printed so they can say it went gold and release it whenever they want. You pop the disc into your console and then it re-downloads the entire entire game. Xbox is notoriously worse about this with games like Starfield and Halo Infinite, but it still does happen on the Sony side of the fence, and that's the problem with live service games as well, like Call of Duty even. If you buy Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War and put it in your console, yeah, some of the game will be on the disc and that's cool, but if you update it, it's a completely different game at this point than it was when it came out. So keeping all of that in mind, I just don't think it's the biggest deal at all that this console has to connect to the internet to pair that disk drive to the console. It really does seem like too, you can take that disk drive and pair it to another console, so it's not like it can only pair once and then it's linked to that console forever, which is great because they're $80. That's a pretty pricey thing to not be able to use with a different PS5. I also wish it was able to be used with the old digital PS5, like they made an enclosure or something for it, but just by the nature of how it was designed, I don't think that would really work out. And beyond all that, the biggest reason why this is happening at all is because of a law. The DMCA thing, like on YouTube, that everyone uses to monetize your videos or get them taken down, I guess some weird like aspect of that makes it so that Sony legally has to make sure that this drive pairs to the console it ships with or is plugged into, and they can't really do anything about it. Like, Sony's a big company, but they're not going to change US legislation just so they don't have to have their disk drive paired to the console. And I'm not trying to defend a big corporation or anything like that, but like, there are way more legitimate things I think you could criticize about the PS5 Slim. Like, I'm very curious personally if the big reduction in size is coming down to cooling. Like, how did they fit that fan in there? Is the heatsink dramatically smaller? We've had reports of the PS5 overheating over the summer, and that was the bigger one with the heatsink that's still pretty big inside of it. Also, I think it sucks that they're splitting the plates up. Like, this console has 4 plates and they're a completely different shape, so if you already bought plates for your original PS5, you're kind of SOL on bringing those forward, and now they have to choose if they're going to make plates for the new PS5 at all, or if they're going to make both, like for the old PS5 and the new one, or the most likely thing is if they make them at all, they'll abandon the old PS5 that we all have, and that just isn't good overall. This video is sponsored by Crucial. Look, I've said it a million times on this channel, whether you've had a PS5 since launch, you just got one, or you're going to get a PS5 Slim as soon as it's available, the first thing you should buy for your console is a new SSD. And that's where the sponsor of this video, Crucial, and their T500 SSD come in super handy. The coolest thing about this SSD is that it's fast. You get read speeds of up to 7,400 megabits per second and write speeds of up to 7,000 megabits per second. So no matter what you're doing, it's going to be quick. And as we've seen in other tests, the faster your drive is that you put in your PlayStation 5, the better of an experience you're going to have, because you will notice the difference. And the best part is, whether you want to use it in your laptop, your gaming PC, or your PlayStation 5, they have options for you. They have different sizes. They have a version with a heatsink for the PlayStation 5. They have a version without the heatsink for a PC or a laptop. They make it super easy to just grab the right model for whatever you want to do. Of course, it works great with the PlayStation 5, and if you put one of these drives in your PC, you'll be able to take advantage of direct storage, which will make load times lightning fast. So when you're ready to grab one of these SSDs, I'll have it linked down in the description. But once again, huge shout out to Crucial and the T500 for sponsoring this video. Let's jump back into the PlayStation news. And I think it's absolutely wild that this thing isn't coming in black to begin with. You know that they're going to release plates or a black edition down the road, because once the Slim comes out, that's when you start seeing special editions. That's when you start seeing other colorways. But I don't know. I just don't think the white PS5 looks very good. It's a dust magnet and it gets dirty really easily. So I'd just prefer if I was able to have a black version of this from go. But knowing that the thing is out in the wild and Sony said that it's coming out in November, I want to know when it's going up for pre-order, because it looks like it's going to come out around Black Friday, which is a crazy time to release a console. The only reason I could think of Sony maybe holding back the release date is because they have a huge stock of the current PlayStation 5 and they want to get rid of that before they release the new one, which that makes sense. I would just say you announced the new version of the PS5 too early, especially considering there's a bunch of Spider-Man 2 collector's editions out there still in the wild that are waiting to be bought. Either way, I'm noticing a lot of negative Sony sentiment lately, and after playing a lot more of Spider-Man 2, I think it's a little unwarranted. I think they're making good moves that are going to pay off in the long run, like getting rid of people who are pushing them to make more live service games. Of course, that's going to result in a drought of games for a little bit, but they're making the right moves to right the ship and make sure that we get the games we want, which is big single player action adventure games that only PlayStation can make, right? Like, it's good that they're removing these people. It just would be better if these people never really made these mistakes in the first place. But you know, it's like worrying about spilled milk. You can't do anything. You can just push push forward, and I think they're pushing forward in the right way. Overall, I'm getting more sold as time goes on the PlayStation 5 Slim. I think I am going to pick one up just so I can move my regular PS5 that's connected to my TV in my living room down here. Then I'll keep the Slim upstairs because it'll fit in the TV cabinet. And then when the Pro comes out, I'll move one of the older PS5s up to my bedroom and make sure that my big OLED uses the PS5 Pro. I think that's like the best way to do it. I know it's a little crazy to have a PS5 connected to every TV in my house, but I like playing on the thing and I like playing in different parts of my house, and I am sick of moving the thing around, so sue me. Next up here, let's talk about God of War, because there's a lot going on in the background with this series. It seems like we are eventually going to, of course, get God of War 3, but in the interim, there's going to be a Miles Morales style game that's going to be announced at the Game Awards this year that'll kind of tie up the loose ends of what happens with Atreus at the end of the game, which I think is really cool. Now, these reports are coming from a verified leaker, so I think they're pretty believable, and they've come out a few times over the past month or so. This is just the first time I've seen it gain traction, and honestly, it sounds very believable based on what we've seen in the past. The two examples that are given are that this could be like the Iki expansion for Ghost of Tsushima, or it could be a Miles Morales style game, and we've heard a lot of reports about Miles Morales style games coming out of Sony a lot more frequently just because they're quicker to make, they're easier to turn around, they're easier to turn a profit on, and of course, with games like Assassin's Creed Mirage coming out at $50 and selling like an insane amount of copies, it seems like this is the coolest thing that they can do in between the huge mainline entries that are going to take 5 years to develop. I thought maybe they were teasing that Atreus would take over in God of War 3, and I just don't want to play a full God of War game as him. He controls entirely different from Kratos. He's more range and magic based, whereas Kratos is like full on brutality, Dark Souls style, barbarian swinging an axe and everything like that. That's what I'm coming to God of War for. So if we're getting like a full mainline entry in the God of War saga, I really want to play as Kratos. So having this interstitial game where they can try out new things with Atreus, wrap up the story, let us know what's going on in the world of the giants, that seems like a best of both worlds scenario, and I really have no problem with it. One of the best games I played in the PS4 generation was Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, which was set up exactly the same. They took characters from Uncharted 4 and made new assets in the Africa map, but mostly reused assets to build something new, and it was a great story. I could finish it in like a whole day of a playthrough or split it up over a couple of days, and the best part was it was only $40. I mean, it's no secret that I'm a huge fan of the rebooted God of War saga that they've made. I really hope it becomes a trilogy and we don't have to wait too long for that third game, but having one in between where you get to play as Atreus in the land of the giants, I think that's going to be pretty cool. Third on my list here, we have to talk about this super disappointing situation at Bungie. So if you haven't heard, which I'm sure you probably have at this point, there were over 100 people laid off at Bungie, and people are not taking this too kindly because A, laying a bunch of people off from a big studio that makes a ton of money, that's just bad in itself. But there was an announcement made when Bungie was purchased by Sony that they don't have to worry about getting laid off or anything like that, and that Sony put like 1.21 billion of the dollars that they paid for Bungie towards keeping staff around, because usually when a studio gets bought, you see a lot of people leave for new opportunities, because if they stay long enough and their shares in the company vest, then they'll be able to get a big payout. And the way this layoff happened at Bungie, a lot of the people laid off were seemingly handpicked to be people who didn't have their funds vested, so they wouldn't be paid out any of this money that was given to Bungie by Sony in the purchase to be given to employees, and that it would just go back to Bungie. So the more people they lay off who aren't vested, the more shares they get back from these people, which really sucks. Also, two composers, Michael Secrist and Michael Salvatore, were laid off as well, which is absolutely mind-blowing, because if you look at the soundtracks these guys have worked on, they produced some of the best music out of any Bungie game ever. Like Marty O'Donnell obviously is like the best of the best when it comes to Halo music, and even I guess maybe Destiny music, because he only worked on the first game. But overall, these guys were just as good, and in some cases better. In the Deepstone Crypt raid, there's a part where you're jumping around a satellite and a song plays called the Deepstone Lullaby, and you just have to stop and listen to it because it's that good. The Witch Queen title theme was awesome. I love the music in Beyond Light as well. Even Lightfall had some really good tracks, and with Final Shape coming out next year, it seems like they've already done their soundtrack work for it, and then Bungie said, cool, we don't need you anymore because we're pretty much done with Destiny 2 after the Final Shape. We're going to reuse assets and do stories instead of seasons, and it's just going to be life support basically for the game. Speaking of final shape though, that's been bumped from February to June, and that seems like a good delay because apparently it wasn't meeting standards. The biggest reason that was given for these layoffs was that they missed their projections by 45% after Lightfall, and I'm just going to tell you right now, that's definitely a management decision. Like, some of the stuff that they ended up doing in Lightfall was terrible, and I understand why people dropped off, because I dropped off. And on top of that, there's tons of great stuff to play right now. Even in the live service realm, you have Diablo 4, which is hitting its stride. It's doing really well. It's a lot of fun. It has a great loot grind right now, so I have even less reason to go back to Destiny, and I feel like a lot of other people are thinking the same thing with 300 or 400 hour RPGs like Starfield and Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of people were speculating that this was a Sony move, and that where Sony said, hey Bungie, you've got to get rid of X amount of people, but we've heard from a ton of sources that that wasn't the case. Basically, Bungie missed their projections, and their only recourse was to delay the final shape till June, delay Marathon to 2025, and lay off a whole bunch of people. Overall, this is obviously a bad situation, but it's also a weird one because it's happening right when we also see Sony kind of stepping back from the live service situation where they were letting Bungie go around and tell all these developers whether or not their game was worth developing when they're all working on multiplayer games. But Sony overall is taking a step back from the live service stuff, and they were just going to let Bungie work on Destiny 2 and Marathon, and now it seems like that's still happening, but Destiny 2 is going to be sort of sunset for Marathon, and then eventually maybe we'll get Destiny 3. But yeah, this is a bad look for Bungie, and this is the first year where I didn't immediately pre-order the new expansion as soon as the showcase ended. I pre-ordered the Witch Queen, Beyond Light, and Lightfall all as soon as the showcase ended so I could get a new weapon, and it just wasn't enough to bring me back this year. And now I think I made the right call because they don't really deserve my money. I don't like the way they're treating people. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.